The council chamber on Nexus Prime had seen many military briefings over the centuries, but none quite like the one Kethvar was about to deliver. Representatives from 12 major species sat in the curved amphitheater, waiting to hear his assessment of human military potential. Most expected a routine report recommending humans for junior membership in research or diplomatic roles. Kethvar stood at the central podium and looked up at the assembled council members. Xanthari tradition demanded that he speak with complete honesty, regardless of how disturbing his conclusions might be. The truth he had discovered at Haven's Rest would reshape how the galaxy understood warfare and survival. He began his report with a simple statement that would echo through Coalition history. Humans were not like any species they had previously encountered. They appeared harmless and peaceful on the surface, but possessed capabilities that made them the most dangerous force in known space. The Council should approve immediate full membership, but also ensure that humanity remained a faithful ally. The Altarian representative interrupted with polite skepticism. Intelligence reports described humans as curious mammals, with limited military technology and no significant combat experience. How could such a primitive species pose any threat to established galactic powers? Surely Kethvar was overstating their capabilities based on one minor engagement. Kethvar activated the holographic display and showed combat footage from the Haven's Rest rescue mission. The Council watched in silence as a civilian research vessel engaged professional Vorth fighters with improvised weapons and untrained crew. They saw humans transform mining equipment into effective weapon systems within hours. They witnessed tactical decisions that defied military logic, but somehow achieved impossible results. The crystalline delegate asked about human casualties during the operation. Losing half their crew in the first battle suggested they were reckless rather than effective. Any species could appear dangerous if they were willing to accept unlimited losses. True military prowess required achieving objectives while minimizing friendly casualties. Kethvar explained that human tactics were not based on accepting losses, but on refusing to accept defeat. They took casualties because they prioritized mission success over personal safety. When faced with the choice between abandoning civilians or risking their own lives, they chose to fight regardless of the odds. This was not recklessness but a different calculation of what mattered most. He showed them more footage of the evacuation operations on Haven's Rest. The Council saw humans working together with impossible coordination despite having no shared military training. Scientists became gunners, engineers became tacticians, medical staff became combat soldiers. Everyone contributed their unique skills to the common goal while maintaining focus under extreme pressure. The Aquatic Federation speaker questioned whether this performance could be replicated by other human crews. Perhaps the New Horizons had exceptional personnel who were not representative of their species as a whole. Most mammals showed wide variation in individual capabilities and courage. One successful mission did not prove that all humans could fight effectively. Kethvar had anticipated this question and had prepared additional evidence. He displayed intelligence reports from other recent incidents where human ships had encountered dangerous situations. Mining vessels had fought off pirate attacks with improvised weapons. Survey ships had rescued stranded crews from hostile environments despite enormous personal risk. Transport captains had refused to abandon passengers even when their ships were failing. The pattern was consistent across all human activities in space. When faced with threats to innocent life, they transformed from peaceful civilians into something that terrified professional killers. The transformation was not limited to military personnel or exceptional individuals. It appeared to be a fundamental characteristic of their entire species. The Hive Collective's drone asked about human motivation for these seemingly irrational behaviors. Most species fought to defend territory or resources or genetic lineage. What could drive humans to risk everything for strangers who offered no evolutionary advantage? Such behavior violated basic survival instincts and should have been eliminated by natural selection. Kethvar paused before answering because this question went to the heart of what made humans unique. They fought not for territory or resources but for abstract principles that transcended biological programming. Concepts like justice and compassion and the inherent value of all thinking life motivated them more strongly than self-preservation instincts. He told the Council about his conversations with human crew members after the battle. Each person described the same moral framework that made abandoning innocent people impossible. They could not ignore suffering when they had the power to help. The biological and emotional cost of inaction was greater than the physical risk of fighting. This ethical programming created a feedback loop that made humans increasingly dangerous as the stakes increased. When protecting one innocent life, they fought with determination. When protecting thousands, they fought with fury. When protecting entire worlds, they would become something that could not be stopped or reasoned with or defeated. The council chamber fell silent as the implications became clear. They were looking at a species that defined their group identity, to include all sentient life in the galaxy. Humans would fight as desperately for alien strangers as they would for their own families. Any threat to civilized life anywhere would provoke a response from humanity as a whole. The Mechanical Union's representative asked about human weapons technology and industrial capacity. Raw determination meant nothing without the tools and resources to make it effective. How quickly could humans build the military infrastructure necessary to support their apparent willingness to fight? Kethvar showed them engineering reports from the New Horizons retrofit operation. Humans had converted a research vessel into an effective warship, using only materials and equipment available on a standard exploration mission. Their ability to improvise solutions under pressure suggested they could rapidly develop military capabilities when circumstances demanded it. More disturbing was their approach to technological development. Most species improved their weapons gradually over long periods of time. Humans appeared to make breakthrough innovations during actual combat situations. They learned enemy tactics in real time and developed countermeasures faster than their opponents could adapt. The final question came from the eldest council member who spoke for all the founding species of the coalition. What recommendation would Kethvar make regarding human membership status? Should they be offered junior partnership with limited responsibilities, or full membership with access to coalition military secrets and technology? Kethvar looked up at the ancient being, who had helped create the Galactic Alliance, and gave his final assessment. Humans should receive immediate full membership with all rights and responsibilities. But more importantly, the coalition should ensure that humanity never had reason to consider them as enemies. He explained that humans would make the most loyal allies imaginable because they fought for shared principles, rather than narrow interests. They would sacrifice their own ships and crews to protect coalition worlds without hesitation. No enemy would be able to break their determination or buy their betrayal. But humans would also make the most dangerous enemies in galactic history. A species that refused to abandon strangers would never surrender when their own survival was threatened. They would find ways to win that other races could not imagine, because they defined victory differently than everyone else. The vote for human membership was unanimous, but Kethvar knew that his real work was just beginning. He requested assignment as military liaison to Human Space Fleet Command. Someone needed to help both sides understand each other before the next crisis erupted. 6 months later, when the Vorth launched their great invasion, it was not coalition battle fleets that turned the tide. It was human volunteers in ships they had built themselves, carrying weapons they had designed during the fighting. They arrived at threatened worlds that had never heard of Earth and fought with the same desperate determination they had shown at Haven's Rest. The galaxy learned what Kethvar had discovered in those terrible hours of combat. Never threaten what humans had decided to protect. Never assume they would choose survival over principle. Never underestimate what ordinary people could become when they decided that something was worth fighting for. Years later, Kethvar served aboard the human dreadnought Defiant Spirit as it patrolled the frontier, worlds where new threats emerged from the unknown regions of space. He watched human crews who looked like teachers and farmers and shopkeepers until the alarm sounded. Then they became something else entirely. Something that made the darkness between the stars seem a little less frightening, because humans had decided that innocent life was worth protecting everywhere in the galaxy, and once humans made that kind of decision, nothing in the universe could change their minds. The first Vorth fighter came at them like a living nightmare made of bone and acid. Its bioplasma cannons glowed with sickly green light as it prepared to tear the New Horizons apart. Kethvar expected the human ship to try evasive maneuvers or perhaps attempt to outrun the faster enemy craft. Instead, Lisa Grant did something that defied every tactical manual in the galaxy. She aimed directly at the fighter and fired everything the ship had. The converted mining lasers punched through the creature's carapace, while improvised missile pods launched their entire payload at point-blank range. The Vorth fighter dissolved into burning fragments before it could return fire. Morrison's voice echoed through the ship's communication system, calm and steady, despite the chaos around them. He ordered his crew to continue toward the planet while engaging any enemy forces that tried to stop the evacuation. His tactical decisions were aggressive and dangerous, but somehow perfectly calculated to achieve their mission goals. The New Horizons dove toward Haven's Rest, while Fourth fighters swarmed around them like angry insects. Pete Rodriguez pushed the engines far beyond their design limits while rerouting power from life support to weapons. The ship shuddered and groaned, under the strain but somehow held together as Lisa Grant picked off enemy craft with surgical precision. Kethvar found himself manning a secondary weapons station alongside Dr. Parker, who had abandoned her medical duties to help with the fighting. The elderly botanist operated the targeting computer with steady hands while he loaded ammunition into the improvised cannons. She had never fired a weapon in anger before, but learned the systems in minutes and began scoring hits on enemy targets. The planet's surface was a scene from hell as they approached the main colony. Vorth ground forces had broken through the defensive perimeter and were moving toward the civilian shelters. Massive biotanks spat acid at fleeing transports while swarms of smaller creatures hunted down anyone who tried to escape. The colony's militia was fighting desperately, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Morrison brought the New Horizons down in a combat landing that should have torn the ship apart. Instead, Pete Rodriguez had somehow reinforced the hull structure and modified the landing systems to handle the stress. They touched down in the middle of the evacuation zone with enemy fire already bracketing their position. The cargo bay doors opened and human crew members ran out carrying weapons and emergency supplies. They moved with the coordination of veteran soldiers despite having no military training. Maria Santos set up a field medical station, while other crew members began loading wounded civilians onto the ship. Everyone worked together with desperate efficiency as enemy forces closed in around them. Kethvar followed a squad of humans led by Lisa Grant toward the main shelter where hundreds of colonists were trapped. Vorth ground troops had surrounded the building and were preparing to break through the reinforced walls. The humans studied the situation for barely 30 seconds before Grant outlined a plan that was either brilliant or completely insane. They were going to attack the Vorth forces, directly with improvised weapons and no backup. Grant would lead half the squad in a frontal assault while the others flanked from the sides. The plan relied on speed and surprise to overcome superior enemy numbers. It was the kind of desperate gamble that should have gotten everyone killed. Instead, something extraordinary happened. The humans moved like they had trained together for years. They covered each other's advance and communicated with gestures and quick words. When Grant's rifle overheated, she threw it aside and drew a backup weapon without missing a beat. When one of her team members was wounded, the others adjusted their positions to protect him while maintaining their attack. The Vorth creatures were larger and stronger than humans, but they could not match the ferocity of the assault. Grant put 3 shots through a biotank's weak points before it could turn its main weapon toward her. Her teammates concentrated their fire on the smaller creatures with devastating effect. Within minutes, the enemy force was destroyed and the shelter was secure. Kethvar had fought beside professional warriors from a dozen species, but he had never seen anything like this. These humans were not just brave or skilled. They were fighting with a kind of focused determination that transformed them into something more dangerous than any weapon. They had decided that these colonists would not die, and that simple choice made them unstoppable. The evacuation continued through the night as more Vorth forces arrived to contest the rescue. The humans adapted their tactics to every new threat with frightening speed. When enemy flyers attacked the landing zone, Pete Rodriguez jury-rigged anti-aircraft weapons from mining equipment. When biotanks tried to break through their defensive perimeter, Dr. Parker identified weak spots in their armor using her knowledge of alien biology. Morrison coordinated everything from the bridge while simultaneously piloting the ship and directing weapons fire. He made split-second decisions that saved lives and found solutions to problems that should have been impossible. When the ship's shields failed, he used the hull as armor. When their weapons overheated, he modified the power systems to keep them firing. The most disturbing moment came when Vorth boarding pods attached to the ship's hull and began cutting through the metal. Kethvar found himself fighting alongside Pete Rodriguez in the corridor outside the engine room. The human engineer was wounded and bleeding, but he refused to retreat to the medical bay. Rodriguez looked at Kethvar with eyes that seemed to burn with inner fire and made a comment that would stay with the Zenthari warrior forever. He said that the Vorth creatures had made a serious mistake when they decided to threaten innocent people in front of humans. They had picked the wrong species to mess with, and now they were going to learn what happened when humans got angry. The boarding party was repelled, but at terrible cost. Half the human crew was wounded and the ship was barely holding together. They should have retreated to lick their wounds and regroup. Instead, Morrison gave the order to continue the evacuation and prepare for another assault wave. Kethavar watched in amazement as the humans patched their wounds and returned to their duties. Maria Santos continued treating injured colonists despite having shrapnel in her arm. Dr. Parker went back to identifying enemy weak points, even though she was exhausted from hours of combat. Lisa Grant kept directing defensive fire while blood ran down her face from a head wound. The final evacuation runs were completed just as Vorth reinforcements arrived in orbit. The New Horizons lifted off with thousands of rescued colonists packed into every available space. The ship was damaged and overloaded, but somehow still flew as Morrison pushed it. Toward the edge of the system, enemy. Fighters pursued them, but Lisa Grant's improvised. Weapons held them off while Pete Rodriguez coaxed impossible performance from the failing engines. The swift current provided cover fire as both ships escaped into hyperspace with their precious cargo of survivors. As the stars streaked past the viewports, Kethavar looked around at the human crew and tried to understand what he had witnessed. These people had transformed from peaceful scientists into something that made professional killers afraid. They had fought not from training or instinct, but from simple conviction that innocent lives were worth protecting. He realized with growing unease that he was looking at the most dangerous species in the galaxy, not because they were violent or aggressive, but because they were righteous. And righteous fury, once awakened, recognized no limits or boundaries. The Vorth had learned this lesson too late. Kethavar wondered if the rest of the galaxy was ready to learn it at all. The medical station at Kepler 7 looked like a refugee camp when the two damaged ships limped into orbit. Thousands of colonists from Haven's Rest needed treatment and temporary housing, while permanent arrangements were made. The New Horizons was so badly damaged that it could barely maintain life support, and the swift current was not much better. After the running battle with Fourth Pursuit, Forces Kethavar spent the first day after their arrival helping transfer wounded to the station's medical facilities. He worked alongside human crew members who should have been in treatment themselves but refused to rest, while civilians still needed help. Maria Santos directed medical teams despite having her arm in a regeneration cast. Pete Rodriguez supervised repairs to critical ship systems while favoring his injured leg. The Centauri warrior found himself studying these humans with new eyes during the quiet moments between crisis responses. Before the battle, they had seemed like typical peaceful mammals focused on learning and exploration. Now he saw something different in their movements and expressions. They carried themselves like veterans of a dozen wars, even though most had never seen combat before Haven's Rest. Dr. Parker approached him while he was reviewing damage reports in the station's temporary command center. She looked exhausted but alert as she sat down beside him with 2 cups of the bitter human beverage called coffee. Her hands showed small scars from handling weapons, and her clothes still smelled like smoke from the battle. She asked him what he thought of their performance during the rescue mission. The question seemed casual, but Kethavar sensed deeper meaning behind it. He studied her face carefully before answering. She was trying to understand something about her own species that the fighting had revealed. Kethavar told her, honestly, that he had never seen anything like what the human crew accomplished at Haven's Rest. Centauri warriors trained for years to achieve the level of coordination and effectiveness that her people had shown in their first real battle. The tactical decisions and adaptive responses were beyond what should have been possible for civilians with improvised equipment. Dr. Parker nodded slowly and stared into her coffee cup before responding. She said that humans were not naturally aggressive or violent. Most of them preferred peaceful solutions to problems and tried to avoid conflict whenever possible. But when something threatened innocent people, they became something else entirely, something that even they did not fully understand. She told him about human history and the strange pattern that appeared in their wars and conflicts. Ordinary people who lived quiet lives would suddenly display incredible courage when their families or communities were in danger. Farmers and teachers and shopkeepers would pick up weapons and fight with a determination that terrified professional soldiers. It was not training or instinct, but something deeper and more fundamental. Kethavar asked her why humans were willing to risk everything for strangers they had never met. His own people fought for duty and honor, but these humans seemed motivated by something different. They spoke about protecting innocent life as if it was a natural law that could not be questioned or ignored. Dr. Parker was quiet for a long moment before giving him an answer that would change how he viewed the galaxy forever. She said that humans had evolved as social creatures who survived by working together and protecting the group. But their definition of the group had expanded over thousands of years to include not just family or tribe or nation, but all thinking beings, everywhere. When humans saw others in danger, they felt a biological and emotional response that demanded action. It did not matter if the victims were the same species or spoke the same language or shared the same beliefs. What mattered was that they were alive and needed help. Humans could not ignore that need without becoming something less than human. She also told him something that made his scales crawl with unease. The scary thing about humans was not that they were willing to die for strangers. The scary thing was that they were willing to kill for strangers. When humans decided that something was worth protecting, they would use any means necessary to achieve that goal. They would become monsters to fight monsters if that was what it took to save innocent lives. Over the next few days, Kethvar interviewed other members of the human crew and heard similar stories. Each person described the same transformation that had occurred during the battle. They had started the mission as scientists and support staff, but ended it as something that even they found disturbing. The capacity for violence had always been there, but it only emerged when circumstances demanded it. Captain Morrison was the most difficult to interview because he seemed uncomfortable discussing what had happened. He spoke about the tactical decisions and crew performance in clinical terms, but avoided talking about his own actions during the fighting. Other crew members described him as completely fearless during the worst moments of the battle, but he insisted that he had been terrified the entire time. Morrison finally admitted that humans were most dangerous when they were afraid because fear forced them to make choices about what mattered most. During the rescue mission, he had been afraid of dying and afraid of failing, and afraid of watching innocent people suffer. The fear had not paralyzed him, but had instead focused his mind on finding solutions to impossible problems. He told Kethvar that humans fought not from courage, but despite terror. They made heroic sacrifices not because they were naturally brave, but because they had decided some things were more important than personal safety. This combination of fear and determination created a kind of focused desperation that could overcome any obstacle. Lisa Grant provided the most tactical analysis of their performance during the battle. She had studied the combat recordings and identified patterns in how the crew had adapted to each new threat. The learning curve was impossibly steep as humans with no military training became effective fighters within hours of their first engagement. She explained that humans were natural problem solvers who thrived under pressure. When faced with life or death situations, their minds worked faster and more creatively than normal. They found solutions that military experts would consider impossible because they were not limited by traditional thinking about what could or could not work. Grant also noted that humans fought as a collective intelligence rather than individual warriors. Each person specialized in what they did best, but remained connected to the group effort. The botanist identified enemy weak points. The cook provided medical support. The engineer improvised new weapons. Everyone contributed their unique skills to the common goal of saving lives. Kethvar began to understand that he had witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history. Most species fought from instinct or training or cultural programming. Humans fought from conscious choice based on moral principles that transcended self-interest. They had created a kind of ethical framework that made them willing to sacrifice everything for abstract concepts like justice and compassion. The implications were terrifying to consider. A species that would risk annihilation to protect strangers would never surrender when their own survival was threatened. They would find ways to win that. Other races could not imagine because they refused to accept defeat when innocent lives were at stake. As the damaged ships prepared to leave Kepler-7, Station Kethvar realized that his mission had failed completely. He had been sent to evaluate human military potential and recommend their membership status in the coalition. Instead, he had discovered something that would change how the galaxy thought about war and peace forever. He was looking at a species that could not be conquered or intimidated because they fought for ideas rather than territory. They would make the most dangerous enemies imaginable, but also the most loyal allies. The question was not whether humans deserved to join the coalition, but whether the coalition deserved to have humans as members. The journey to Haven's Rest took 3 days through hyperspace, and Kethvar spent every hour watching the humans prepare for battle. What he saw during that time changed everything he thought he knew about this strange species. The transformation of the New Horizons began within hours of leaving Earth's system. Pete Rodriguez led teams of engineers through every section of the ship, making changes that seemed impossible with their limited resources. Mining lasers designed for asteroid work became improvised weapons systems. Industrial fabricators that normally made replacement parts started producing ammunition and basic armor, plating. Lisa Grant worked without sleep converting the ship's scientific sensors into targeting systems. She studied every piece of data the Coalition had about Vorth tactics and biology. Her questions to Kethvar became more focused and practical. She wanted to know weak points in Vorth bioarmor and the best ways to damage their organic ships. The academic curiosity was gone, replaced by the sharp focus of someone planning to kill. What disturbed Kethvar most was how the entire crew joined this effort without being ordered. The ship's cook, Maria Santos, began preparing medical supplies and emergency food rations. The botanist Dr. Amy Parker studied Vorth poison glands so she could treat anyone who got injured by their weapons. Even junior crew members who normally cleaned corridors and maintained life support systems volunteered for combat duties. Kethvar tried to understand this behavior by comparing it to his own people. Xanthari warriors trained from childhood to follow orders and maintain discipline under pressure. They fought because duty and honor demanded it. These humans seemed to be making a personal choice to risk their lives for strangers they had never met. He approached Dr. Parker while she was setting up the medical bay for casualties. She was a small woman with gray hair who had spent her career studying alien plant life. Now she was learning how to treat laser burns and bioweapon injuries. When he asked her why she was doing this, she stopped her work and looked at him with serious eyes. She told him that every person on Haven's Rest had the same right to live as anyone else in the galaxy. It did not matter that they were strangers or that saving them was dangerous. What mattered was that they needed help, and the New Horizons crew was in a position to provide it. The choice was simple, even if the execution would be difficult. Kethvar found Captain Morrison on the bridge, studying tactical displays of the Haven's Rest system. The man looked tired but determined. When Kethvar asked him about his crew's readiness for combat, Morrison admitted that most of them had never been in a real fight. They were scientists and engineers and support staff who had joined the space program to explore and learn. None of them had signed up to fight monsters from the dark between stars. But Morrison also said something that made Kethvar's scales crawl with unease. He said that humans had a long history of ordinary people doing extraordinary things when circumstances demanded it. Teachers and farmers and shopkeepers had won wars against professional armies when they were fighting to protect something they cared about. The crew of the New Horizons might be civilians, but they were human civilians, and that made them more dangerous than they appeared. As the ship approached Haven's Rest, the crew gathered for a final briefing. Kethvar watched from the back as Morrison explained the mission. The colony was under siege by 3 Vorth bioships. The planetary shields were failing, and evacuation was the only option. The swift current would engage the enemy directly while the New Horizons rescued as many civilians as possible. The plan was dangerous, and the chances of success were small. Everyone in the room knew that some of them would probably die in the next few hours. Kethvar expected to see fear and hesitation. Instead, he saw something that made no sense to his warrior mind. The humans were afraid. He could smell their fear and see it in their body language. But they were also determined to continue with the mission. They asked practical questions about equipment and timing. They made jokes to ease the tension. They promised to look out for each other during the fighting. Fear did not make them want to run away. It made them want to work together more closely. Pete Rodriguez stood up and made a speech that would haunt Kethvar's dreams for years afterward. He said that humans had evolved as prey animals on a world full of predators. Their ancestors had survived by working together and protecting each other. When something threatened the group, every individual was willing to sacrifice themselves to save the others. It was not heroism or nobility. It was just how humans were built. The ship dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Haven's Rest system, and alarms immediately filled the bridge. The tactical display showed a nightmare scene of destruction. 4th bioships moved through space like living things, breathing acid and firing bioplasma at anything that moved. Smaller fighter craft swarmed around them like insects feeding on a corpse. The colony's shields flickered and failed as massive tentacles wrapped around the orbital defense stations. Distress calls flooded the communication channels as civilian transports tried to escape the planet's surface. Most were destroyed before they could reach safe distance. The few that survived sent desperate pleas for help to anyone who would listen. Captain Morrison gave the order to begin the rescue operation, and the New Horizons accelerated toward the planet. Kethvar felt the ship shudder as Lisa Grant activated the improvised weapon systems. The mining lasers charged with a sound like thunder, while Pete Rodriguez pushed the engines beyond their safety limits. The swift current moved to engage the largest, Vorth bioship while the human vessel headed for the planet's surface. Kethavar expected Morrison to change course when the first enemy fighters appeared on their sensors. No civilian crew should face professional killers in direct combat. The logical choice would be to find a safer approach, or wait for the Zenthari ship to clear the area. Instead, Morrison ordered his crew to battle stations and began plotting an intercept course with the enemy fighters. Lisa Grant armed the weapons while Rodriguez rerouted power to the shields. Dr. Parker began preparing the medical bay for wounded, while Maria Santos distributed emergency supplies to damage control. Teams Kethavar realized with growing horror that these humans were not going to run from the fight. They were going to charge directly into it with improvised weapons and no military training. They were going to risk their lives and their ship to save people they had never met. They were going to do this because they had decided it was the right thing to do. The first enemy fighter exploded under fire from the New Horizons, and Kethavar understood that he was about to witness something unprecedented in galactic history. He was going to watch ordinary civilians transform into something that would make professional warriors afraid. The battle for Haven's Rest was about to begin, and the humans were ready to fight like nothing he had ever seen before. Kethavar gripped his weapon and prepared to learn what it really meant when humans decided to protect something they cared about. Kethavar stood on the bridge of the swift current and watched the blue planet grow larger on the main screen. Earth looked peaceful from space with its white clouds and green lands. The Zenthari warrior had seen many worlds in his 30 years of service, but this one seemed different, not dangerous or strange, just quiet in a way that made him feel uneasy. The mission was simple enough. The Galactic Coalition wanted to know if humans could join their alliance. Most new species failed this test because they were either too weak to help in wars or too violent to trust as friends. Kethavar expected humans to be like most others he had studied. Curious but harmless creatures who would make good traders or scientists but poor soldiers. His commander had chosen him for this job because he was good at reading other species. In his years of service, he had watched dozens of alien races try to prove they belonged in the Coalition. Most disappointed him with their lack of fighting spirit. The few that showed promise usually proved too reckless to work with others. The swift current moved closer to Earth, and soon another ship appeared on their sensors. The human vessel looked nothing like a warship. It was long and white with large windows and what appeared to be scientific equipment attached to its hull. The ship moved slowly and carefully like it was carrying fragile cargo. A voice came through the communication system, speaking in the common galactic language. The words were clear but had a strange accent that Kethavar had never heard before. The speaker introduced himself as Captain Jake Morrison of the ship New Horizons. He welcomed the Zenthari delegation and invited them to come aboard for a meeting. Kethavar followed his commander through the airlock and into the human ship. The corridors were bright and clean but felt more like a research station than a military vessel. Strange smells filled the air that reminded him of growing plants and cooking food. Everything seemed designed for comfort rather than battle. Captain Morrison met them in what appeared to be a dining area. He was tall for a human with brown hair and eyes that seemed to smile even when his mouth was serious. Two other humans stood beside him. One was a woman with short red hair, who introduced herself as Lisa Grant, the tactical officer. The other was a man with dark skin called Pete Rodriguez, who worked as the ship's engineer. Kethavar studied them carefully as they talked. The humans seemed relaxed and friendly in a way that confused him. When his people met strangers, they maintained proper distance and showed respect through formal behavior. These humans acted like they were greeting old friends. They asked questions about Zenthari culture and shared stories about their own world with genuine interest. The conversation continued over a meal that the humans had prepared for their guests. The food was strange but not unpleasant. Kethavar noticed how the humans laughed often and spoke with their hands as much as their voices. They showed no signs of the warrior discipline that marked truly dangerous species. If anything, they seemed almost childlike in their enthusiasm for learning about other worlds. Lisa Grant asked many questions about Coalition military tactics and technology. Her interest seemed purely academic rather than practical. When Kethavar described some of the Coalition's recent battles against hostile species, she listened with the curiosity of someone studying history rather than preparing for war. Pete Rodriguez was more interested in ship designs and engineering challenges than weapons or strategy. As the meal continued, Kethavar began to relax. These humans were clearly intelligent and well-meaning, but they lacked the hard edge that marked true warriors. They would probably make useful members of the Coalition in research or diplomatic roles, but they would never be fighters. The galaxy had enough peaceful species who contributed knowledge and resources while others did the dangerous work of keeping everyone safe. Then the alarm started. The sound was harsh and urgent, filling the dining area with flashing red light. Captain Morrison was on his feet, instantly moving toward the bridge with his officers close behind. Kethvar and his commander followed, trying to understand what was happening. The bridge was suddenly full of activity as human crew members took their positions at various stations. Morrison slid into the captain's chair while Grant took her place at what appeared to be a weapons console. Rodriguez moved to an engineering station and began checking readouts with quick, efficient movements. The main screen showed a tactical display that made Kethvar's blood run cold. Dozens of red symbols were moving through space near the outer edge of human territory. The shapes were unmistakable to anyone who had fought in the Coalition Wars. Vorth bioships had emerged from hyperspace and were heading toward inhabited worlds. Morrison turned to look at the Xanthari delegation. His friendly expression had changed completely. The easy smile was gone, replaced by something harder and more focused. When he spoke, his voice carried new authority that demanded attention and respect. The situation was clear from the tactical reports flooding in. A massive Vorth hive fleet had appeared near the colony worlds. They were already attacking the outer settlements and moving toward more heavily populated areas. The nearest Coalition battle fleet was weeks away. Local defense forces were overwhelmed and calling for any ships that could help with evacuation efforts. Captain Morrison stood and addressed his crew with calm certainty. He told them they were going to help with the rescue mission. There was no discussion or debate. The decision was made and everyone began preparing immediately. Kethvar watched in amazement as the peaceful research vessel transformed around him. The humans moved with purpose and efficiency that seemed impossible for civilians. Grant began modifying the ship's sensor arrays to track enemy movements. Rodriguez started rerouting power systems to boost their speed and maneuverability. Even crew members who had been preparing food or maintaining equipment dropped their normal duties to help with battle preparations. Kethvar approached Morrison as the ship changed course toward the danger zone. He had to ask the question that confused him most. Why would a research ship with no military training volunteer for such a dangerous mission? The logical choice would be to stay away from the fighting and let proper warships handle the threat. Morrison looked at him with those same steady eyes and gave an answer that would stay with Kethvar for the rest of his life. He said that leaving people to die when you could help them was not really a choice at all. It was just another way of choosing to be the kind of person who abandons others when they need help most. The swift current followed the new horizons toward the threatened worlds, and Kethvar began to wonder if he had completely misunderstood what humans really were.